On December 27th, Moist Critical posted a speedrun challenge. Not just any speedrun challenge, but a $10,000 bounty for whoever has the world record in the game Amok Runner by January 10th. Now, you might be thinking, what the is Amok Runner? It's a great question. Apparently it's a game based on a book, but there's no way that the game is doing a justice of the book because this game is dog. Charlie himself says that it is one of the worst games ever made.
Let's not smoke a penis here. Let's call it what it is. It's not the best game ever made.
And if you play it for 10 minutes, you will also probably have that feeling. However, he was inspired to do this challenge because he felt somewhere deep inside that it had speedrunning potential. I'm going to walk you through how Amok Runner became a completely broken game in the matter of 2 weeks. It has stories of heartbreak, Discord drama, and many, many hours of speedrunners hitting their heads against the wall until something clicks. This is how speedrunners completely break a game. The story mainly focuses around this woman named Linda, who needs an abortion, and you're a doctor who can give her the abortion. However, you are a little bit of a sleazebag, and you ask Linda for some favors in return for the abortion, in which she does not oblige. She ends up going to Chinatown to get a botched abortion, which ends up killing her, which leaves you, the doctor, with much guilt. You ultimately get rid of Linda's body without anyone realizing, as well as commit suicide, as you cannot carry the pain of Linda's death. Definitely a different kind of story that you don't see in games nowadays. Now, before we go into the glitches and all the crazy stuff, because trust me, there is, we got to do just a quick walkthrough of the game. The game starts you in a boat and has you walk to a bench and tell this man your story. It is a fever dream of a game. Just listen to this first opening cutscene. This is the first dialogue you get in the game.
Excuse me. I think you wanted to sit alone because when you saw me, I had the feeling that you were a bit hesitant.
I know how absurd it is to tell this to the first person I've just met, but I'm so hard.
I had the feeling.
I'm a doctor. This is the climax of my story. I must tell you everything from the very beginning.
This story is what most of the game is. It's you running around the town, going from point A to point B, sometimes in a car. You solve puzzles, at times you shoot enemies. It's a pretty simple game, and upon first inspection, you would think that this game does not have that much to offer, but you would be oh so wrong. Now, the first steps to breaking a game for speedrunning is really just getting a feel for how it works and optimizing the things that are more obvious. The very first glitch was found by Charlie himself, appropriately named the Moist Skip. He found that on the beginning boat, you can clip yourself at these stairs and get up on top of the boat, which lets you get to where the game ultimately ends by pushing this casket into the water. However, there's no way to sequence break the game. Even though this game is complete ass, it still has a bunch of checkpoints and flag checking to ensure that it's not completely busted. However, runners did find that you could do this skip at the end of the run, and it saves about 4 seconds. However, it's extremely inconsistent. The next skip that would be practical and used in runs is called Dane Skip. Near the beginning of the run, upon trying to go to your house, this scary guy tries to kill you. He hits you in the back with an axe a bunch. You have to run into this cabin, hide out, and then leave. Runners learned that you could run into the cabin, run out, and clip through the door and go straight to your house, saving a good chunk of time. Then runners figured out that by just taking a different route to your house, you could entirely skip this encounter. And this was one of the first major things found in the game. In some areas of the run, just simply reloading your checkpoint saves you time. And in some cases, there's one in particular that saves 10 seconds, where as soon as you reach this house, you can reload the checkpoint and it puts you much closer to where you need to be. And thankfully, it doesn't really cost you any time because they're using in-game time for timing. Because they're using in-game timing for the runs, any time spent in loading screens does not lose you time. Faster routing would be found for the driving segments and polished over time, as well as for some running segments. They eventually found that during this scene where Linda dies, if you have music disabled, then you completely avoid this terrible, awful piano that plays for way too long. This extremely emotional, heartstring plucking thing is happening. Dracula is playing. By disabling music, it allows you to just reload a checkpoint much earlier during Linda's death cutscene. With different pathing in the graveyard, you can entirely avoid the trigger for the monster cutscene, saving around 5 seconds. By timing it just right, you can avoid holding your head during this headache cutscene by looking at the ship in the distance and then flipping it back, which saves just a couple seconds. However, another trick called Gray Skip, which was originally named Chinese Linda Skip because someone thought they found a way to speed up the Linda portion of Chinatown, but they were wrong. However, they found this other thing which prevents you from having a longer death scene when you finish an encounter with enemies and just named it Chinese Linda Skip. But then Gray Skip made more sense. Eventually, the holy spreadsheet would be born, which every runner would keep on a side monitor detailing how to optimize every puzzle in order to do them in as little steps as possible. Coders in the community even developed practice tools that allowed you to practice some of the puzzles and memory so it could be done faster in a run. It wouldn't stop there, however. Runners eventually figured out the exact values for enemies' health, how much damage your shots do depending on where they hit. It would take only one day for runners to create a save manager. This allowed you to load saves so that you could practice any portion of the run over and over again. And on that same day, only an hour later, a trainer was made which allowed you to now make save states. It allowed you to save your position, load your position. It allowed you to view your exact angle values, your positioning, so you could get extremely precise when practicing and trying to figure out skips. And without these tools, it's hard to say whether a lot of the things that I'm going to tell you about would have been found. Mind you, everything I've told you about has been found in the first 2 days. Now, lastly, every good speedrun has a trick at the beginning. In Mario 64, you have Lakitu Skip. In Amok Runner, you have Linda Skip. For whatever reason, when you're caught in this room with Linda at the beginning, the door shuts automatically. It's very scary. And if you position yourself just right and you go at just the right time, you can get through the door as it shuts, allowing you to walk through the house while Linda's talking to you, which saves about 8 seconds. Now you may be thinking to yourself, how do you time the Linda Skip? You just gotta look at her feet. Yeah, you stare at her feet. And as soon as her feet cross each other, that's when you start holding up. And it works. Now I know what you might be thinking, or maybe you're not even thinking, you're sleeping, because you want to see some crazy shit. You want to see some Ocarina of Time wrong warp type stuff. You want to see some crazy backwards long jump hyper speed wall kick type stuff. So let me show you the stuff that would shake the very foundation of Amok Runner speedrunning. Now if you play through this game casually, which I don't know why the fuck you ever would, you would maybe not realize how bad the physics are. By getting out of a vehicle or a bike, runners discovered that in certain positions, you can get sent flying, or the car can get sent flying. Neither of the things I just showed you are used in runs, but they would lay the foundation for similar tricks that were actually useful for going fast. Many theories would come from this discovery, including ideas like being able to skip the crane puzzle, or being able to entirely skip the driving portion from this house to the mansion. However, when these things were discovered, none of these tricks would come to fruition in actual runs, as they were insanely inconsistent and basically felt unusable. The first real speedrun looking thing that would get used in runs was bike skip. Normally, after you talk with Linda, you get on your bike and you ride over to the train station to try and catch Linda. However, if you take this bike and you drive over by this river, by this nice man, and you position yourself just right, he will shove his large fishing rod right into you in just the right way to send you flying over to the train station, saving around 20 seconds if done well. Now this was a huge find because at this time runners were already getting the times down pretty good. They were getting pretty tight to the point where a skip like this was something everyone wanted to start doing. And this trick was no joke. Distortion 2 was one of the first people I saw really messing around with it, and it took him many hours to get any kind of consistent setup. These are not lenient tricks whatsoever. You have to be in a very particular position to get launched. Eventually, this skip evolved to become known as cock skip, and you would, instead of using the fisherman by the river, you would use this man by all these chickens as the launcher. His cock would launch you. But another huge thing would come out of this skip. It would spark a major discovery regarding how Amok works in regards to FPS. And this is ultimately when the first big community decision happened, as people realized that FPS affected certain things in the game. This includes driving through fences. At a high enough FPS, you can drive straight through a fence with no care in the world. However, once you're at lower FPSs or around 60 FPS, it becomes basically RNG and can only be done consistently by opening the map as you break through the fence. It also affected launches. Higher FPS allowed you to launch further and faster. This was discovered because people were trying to copy Distortion 2's setup for the Fisherman launch, and they were not able to replicate it with any success. This ultimately pushed the community to advocate for a 60 FPS frame rate cap, so that runners who have better hardware or even different hardware didn't have any unfair advantages. Because it wasn't even necessarily having a better computer. Some people had worse computers than others, but they ran the game better. The mods at first didn't want to allow this. They didn't want any separate programs to mess with your frame rate, but ultimately the change was enacted and it made things a lot easier and also consistent across runners' different setups. But this would not be the first time there was a big community decision or debate, even downright arguments in the Discord. But we'll get there. When it comes to speedrunning, discoveries are obviously always first before getting used in runs. So while these skips were getting polished and improved behind the scenes, runners had started to get seriously good runs together. World records would be handed off back and forth as players got a grasp on the game, quickly going from a 46 to low 30s, and ultimately by the time I got involved with the game, which was after about a week, people were pushing for a sub 28-minute run. Now here's where things got very interesting for some and very depressing for others. Zach777 got a 27:57 world record, which was insanely clean. It was extremely impressive considering the only major glitches it used were cock skip and Linda skip, amongst the other things that I had mentioned previously. And I believe that it was at this point that runners realized they had to start digging deeper and really start trying to figure out how to implement the two next big skips that would come to fruition. Crane skip, aka cone skip. This saves time by skipping the crane puzzle entirely, and mansion skip. Mansion skip essentially means skipping the entire drive from this house all the way to the mansion, which is on complete opposite sides of the map. It is the longest drive that you take in the game. Now, I remember this vividly being the dark ages. It was very hard to beat Zach's time. He had perfect fights, very clean movement, his skips were good, it was just a solid run. It seemed like it was almost untouchable. This was a filter for many runners, including myself. I had been playing Amok for a couple days, but when it came time to have to start figuring out mansion skip and the cone skip, it got very difficult, as these skips are extremely hard to do consistently, and they seem to almost be somewhat random when they work. The thing is, if you do a crane skip, then you basically have to do a mansion skip, because if you skip the crane, then you can't drive out of the area. You can do this other route where you go all the way around, and it's very slow, but it still ends up saving 10 to 20 seconds if done well, but doesn't seem quite worth it. If you were able to somehow hit a mansion skip and a crane skip, world record would be yours guaranteed. It doesn't matter how good Zach's world record was, you were going to beat it if you got those skips. The first prototype of skipping from this house to the mansion was something called log launch. This didn't have much consistency, but it did prove the theory that one could do a crane skip and then afterwards do a mansion skip. It's also one of the craziest things I think I've ever seen in a game. This launch sends you at such a high speed that you literally enter another dimension. I'm not kidding. Your field of view completely flips itself in the air and then unflips itself during the launch. Runners had tried to get this in runs for a while with no luck. No one was able to hit the log launch. It was so hard that people were having seriously heated debates in the Discord about getting it banned. It eventually got brought to Charlie's attention, to which he said this: "I don't see a time I'll ever ban a trick, to be honest, unless it makes the run unwatchable or dog shit, which log skip is not. Hitting that is pure hype, and then the pressure is on to not fuck up after." So it was settled. It would not get banned. Runners would have to figure something out or some way to do it. It took a full 2 days before someone found a better launch setup using nearby planks. This plank launch would be the reason another new ruling would be made. Instead of having a hard 60 FPS cap on the run, it was a soft FPS cap, meaning that you couldn't go above 60, but you could go below 60. The thing about the plank launch is that it sends you way too far in the air. Like, you are literally in the air for way too long and it's not fast. But runners started experimenting and they found that if you lower the FPS to around 20, you can get a much better launch that gets you to the mansion much more consistently. And so, this would become the new age of Amok running. There had now been a more consistent way to hit the launch. It wasn't super consistent and runners would still lose many runs to it, but it was consistent enough to do it in a run. The first run to include the full crane skip and mansion skip was spiceeTV's 26:52. He had cut the 27, which was previously thought to be basically impossible without these skips. And at this point, to get a world record, you basically needed to hit your cock skip, the cone skip, mansion plank skip, all in one run, amongst the other optimizations that had already been found earlier on in the challenge and had been in the previous world records. Now, fast forward in the timeline, at this point, time is ticking. On the final day, the people who had not already gone insane from Amok, and trust me, a lot of people stopped running the game once mansion skip and crane skip became a part of needing to get world record. The main runners people were looking at were Spicy, Zach, Distortion, Weegee, and BobToad. And they were all running on the final day. Zach had hit a 25:33 a few days prior on January 7th, and it was still sitting as the #1 run on the leaderboard on the final day. Other runners were coming close, but it seemed like it was possible that Zach would come through as the champion of Amok Runner. However, with around 8 hours left in the challenge, Distortion had a run going where he hit his crane skip and mansion skip. This run was poised to beat the world record handedly after finishing the final boss fight, and at this point, you're basically set free. However, a new discovery had been found the day before, called bowling, which is one of the most absurd looking tricks in the entire run. Looks like something straight out of GTA or something, where if you set your FPS to a very low number and walk into a moving car, which is RNG dependent whether or not the car will be there, you get sent flying forward through the second headache scene, and Distortion needed to hit this skip in order to get the world record. It was the last thing sitting between him and $10,000.
I think we could still get it. I'm gonna go for it. Good dude.
He said fuck it on this very run that had a 25:24 best possible time.
Bro, no. He wasn't moving fast enough. Rip run.
He didn't hit the skip, and it lost him his only run that would get to that point on world record pace that day. With only a few hours left on the final day, and Zach's 25:33 still sitting in first place, it seemed that it might be over. However, with 2 hours left remaining in the challenge, Weegee had gotten a run going that had hit crane skip and mansion skip, and it looked great for world record pace. But just because he hit these tricks did not guarantee a world record, as Zach's run had hit those tricks and had clean gameplay. Not only that, but I've yet to cover the car chase sequence. In the last 5 minutes of the run, you have to do a car chase in which you drive around the city to get to the graveyard for God knows what reason. If you bump into anything or anyone or slow down even slightly anywhere, you immediately get popped in the head by these cops that are chasing you, and you have to redo the chase, essentially killing any run that happens to. This makes it arguably the most nerve-wracking part of the run before finishing it up. So there Weegee was, on world record pace, only needed to get through the chase and have a somewhat clean boss fight, and he was basically set for a world record. He was doing the car chase, hitting the turns, had close calls, and ultimately made it to the graveyard without any issues. He had a somewhat dirty boss fight, which left him having only a few seconds to spare to get the world record. He had approached the boat, had his dialogue, time was ticking. He didn't want to go for moist skip at the end, as it's just a trick that if you miss it even once, it's already not worth going for, and it's a very difficult trick that no one had really seemed to master. He got to the end of the game where you have to push Linda's coffin into the water, and he had done it.
He will know nothing. Belongs to me.
Weegee had secured the run. With 2 hours left in the challenge, he got a 25:32, beating Zach's world record by 1 second.
I have a lot of conflicting thoughts, so it's kind of why I'm not like popping off super hard.
And in true Weegee fashion, he immediately reset the run and continued doing attempts.
I really have to do more. But we got world record. I'm happy, and thanks for the subs and the support. But I have to do more to make sure.
The Amok machine was running at full capacity, yet Weegee's run sat atop the leaderboard, and as time went out and runners lost their final runs and had their final Amok, Weegee was crowned as the champion after 2 weeks of hardcore Amoking. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good night, or day, or whatever. Bye.